This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Hi, my name is Pamela Fuselli, and I'm the host of Popping the Bubble Wrap. Are you the person in your family who worries about the safety of others, about buying safety products and using them? Are you yelling, "Yes, that's me"? This is the podcast for you. Raising a child or children can be a hair-raising undertaking, and keeping them safe is a priority. Parachute's Popping the Bubble Wrap podcast explores what you really need to think about as a parent or caregiver, and provides easy tips on prevention strategies. No bubble wrap here, though. On a summer afternoon, there's no better way to cool off than to head to the local pool or lake and go for a swim. It's a joy to watch young children discover water. Good family fun all around. It's not news, though, that water can pose a risk to people of any age, and this is especially true for young children. Even just at home in the bathtub, the risk of drowning is present. In this episode, we'll discuss risks around, in, and on the water and strategies to keeping your child safe, whether at play or just getting clean. Joining me today are Brittany, Dave, and Liane. Thanks so much for joining me on Parachute's Popping the Bubble Wrap podcast.
Thanks for having us.
So water safety, this is a big one because it's relevant right away, starting when your child's an infant with bathing and in the bathtub, and then we kind of age into swimming activities. Can you talk to me a little bit about what water situations worry you most as a parent? And Brittany, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. So I'm in Saskatchewan, where we have ice over every body of water, probably for more of the year than we don't have it. I fell through ice as a kid, and it was the closest to death I've been, and I am deathly afraid of my kids being anywhere near ice. So that's usually the one that kind of makes my hairs stand up.
I'll bet. Yeah, that's something that I think probably parents that do a lot of outdoor activities may be aware of as well. But maybe those of us that live in city settings might not be top of mind for sure. Dave, what's your worry or experience with water and your little ones?
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to agree with Brittany because living in Northwestern Ontario, lots of ice, lots of water. My children are on the ice out at camp during the winter months, ice fishing, stuff like that. It's always in the back of my mind, safety out there. Yeah.
Do they do swimming lessons or swimming in pools at all and things like that?
They do. Yeah. My son's finished pretty much all his swimming lessons, and my daughter's working her way through it. So, and my step kids are all, working their way up through it too as well.
And they love the water.
Oh yeah, they're always in the water. When we're out of camp, everyone's swimming as much as possible. I know for when it's open water, it's usually an adult on the beach making sure that everyone's okay when we're out there.
Right. And I guess, when you're talking about, falling through the ice and water issues, it's sometimes hard to determine how thick the ice is and how, whether it is safe to go and walk on or skate on or whatever activity you're doing on the ice. Liane, what's been your experience with water issues? Have you had, the bathing bathtub kind of experience or in pools, or have you also had experience on the ice and out on open water?
So I'm situated in Ontario, so we are lucky enough to have access to a family cottage, and I think that's the one body of water that makes me more nervous because we all know that at the cottage there's lots of movement, lots of things going on, lots of people. So I would say that's one of the things. And also we have friends who have pools, so we're in a big city. When we're together with friends, I always have a little bit of anxiety when it comes to big crowds and lots of kids near the pool. My kids are still quite young. They're both under 4. So they're just beginning their water exposure. Bathtubs, I'm not so nervous because I think I set ground rules with my husband early on before the girls were able, like were born. It's like, you never leave my child in the bathtub by herself. If you have anything to do, you pick up the child. So those were like ground rules from day one, because I know how unsafe water can be. But I think it's a team effort to kind of keep everybody safe in all those settings.
It's interesting you say that. Don't leave them alone for a second. I think a lot of parents think, "Oh, I'll just run out and get a towel," or, when we didn't have cell phones, it was answering the door or whatever. Just for a second, it won't, that I can be back in enough time. And too often, unfortunately, that isn't the case, because it is so quick and silent as well. Brittany, do you have a similar approach around bath time?
Yeah, for sure. My kids are a little bit older. They're almost 7 and 9. So my 9-year-old is more into showers these days, which is a little bit less stressful. But my son is definitely still tumbly in the tub at times. So he's one that we for sure don't leave alone at all.
I think what I've heard from your discussion is there's a number of different scenarios or different situations that you can find, water safety being of top of mind, even in the house or in a backyard pool or the lake, at the cottage. And with a lot of people around, I think a couple of you have mentioned, supervision and watching kids while they're in and around water. Dave, how do you respond if you, and have you found your child or one of your children in a risky situation around water? Or what's your approach to that? You talked a little bit about supervising, but how do you do that in particular?
Well, I think the old lifeguard in me kind of comes out, and and I'm very vigilant around the water, especially when the younger ones are near, keeping an eye on them all the time, and usually ensuring that we're no further than like waist, chest deep, depending on their skill level for swimming. My oldest two they're pretty strong swimmers. The younger two are very, they're varying levels of comfort. So always someone on the beach, keeping an eye on them is usually the best way to do it. Or I'll be out in the water with them, and I'll be swimming and ensuring that they're always safe. Always have a pool noodle or a floating device with me at that when I'm out there too. Mm-hmm.
And what about life jackets or PFDs? Do you wear those as well?
The youngest one used one of those floaties, don't know if you know with the water wings and across the chest. Even with that, it's still someone's in the water with them, not left alone. I don't trust them. My kids never learned, and they never swam with life jackets. They were always, always push them to just swim more independently to be more water safe.
Mm-hmm. Do you use boats at all?
I do, yes.
Yeah. And you have life jackets on
life jackets all the time. That's ingrained in the kids. They know that they can't get in the boat unless their life jacket is on, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and they've made some that are much more fashion forward, if you will, and a little more comfortable to wear in a lot of cases. Because that's sometimes the barrier to wearing them is they're uncomfortable and you look funny in them, but they are definitely one of the main safety devices when you're in and around water, especially on a boat.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that it just makes it so much easier if, any kind of worry on the lake, if it gets rough or anything like that, everyone's protected.
Yeah, absolutely. Liane, what's your approach? In even talking, I mean, your kids maybe are a bit young, but, have you had a point in time when you've had them in a situation that you were alarmed about, and how do you manage that?
So I think the best way is just a lot of starting them young with certain rules. My 4-year-old knows that she's not allowed to run to bath by herself, that she's not allowed to run to bath when her sister's around. So we started ingraining that in her very, very young. And another strategy that we use is when we're at the cottage, there's a certain place where you go down to the water. And we started with all of the cousins and nieces and kind of kids at the cottage that if you're past that point, you have to be wearing a life jacket. Okay. So they already know that, I need my life jacket, so they won't go near the water. And they also find an adult. So it's kind of like our way of setting ground rules before they even start discovering the water. Unfortunately, my kids haven't had that much exposure to swimming lessons and stuff like that because of COVID and because of the
Right.
pools being closed. So we're just starting to catch them up. So that's one thing that we're trying to do with the children, is starting to get them exposed. And I feel like a lot of parents out there right now are in the same boat as I am, where we've been limited to the exposure of the courses available.
Brittany, what about your experience with your kids? They're a little bit older now, but have you had any close calls, or how do you manage talking about water safety or approaching water safety in your house?
Yeah, for sure. We did have a close call when my daughter was maybe 3 or 4. We were with some friends at a water park, and one kid managed to get loose and disappear from our group, and that was terrifying. And I was really thankful that it was a water park with a lot of lifeguards around, so it wasn't too long before we tracked him down, but it was definitely a scary moment. We very proactively had our kids in swim lessons right from a young age. So I think 3 or 4 months old, both of them were in swim lessons as much as we could until they aged out of programs. One of them swims like a fish and the other sinks like a rock. So I kind of approach each of them a little bit differently. But we also have some of those hard and fast rules. So open water, anything above your belly button, you're either within arm's reach of an adult or you have a life jacket on. And if it's enclosed, if it's a pool or hot tub or something like that they're unfamiliar with, then they're also using a life jacket until they're a little bit more comfortable and know where any dips are, things like that. When it comes to ice, we don't go there. We don't risk it. A skating rink is available in pretty much every neighborhood in my province, so we don't need to risk ponds and lakes for those kinds of activities. And so yeah, we just kind of have a few hard and fast rules, and then lots of safety training and life or swim lessons from an early age.
Yeah, that's great. You guys have talked about, having either family members alongside and starting with cousins and extended family, or having friends and that. Have you run into differences of opinion with your friends or family, or people who think that maybe you're being too protective or not protective enough? In some other conversations I've had with parents, that sort of peer pressure or judgment has come up, and I wonder if it's come up in conversations around water safety or your approaches to that. Liane, you talked about having a family approach, even with cousins. Has there been agreement amongst the adults or the decision makers?
Yeah, so I think because of the exposure at the cottage and having young kids in the family, I think we always have stuck to that, just because you hear of those things in the media. Some people see it at their work. I have medical people in my family. I'm also from a medical background. So you hear these horror stories of someone turned their back for 2 minutes, no one was watching one of the kids, and the kids went under. So I think we have a very similar approach. Some people think that we're a little bit too over the top, but I feel like your child's safety isn't something to be nonchalant about. But I feel it's also, your exposure and your child's exposure. And like Brittany was saying, you have to treat every child with their own skill level. So I feel like you have to know where your children are, how experienced they are with water. So I'm sitting where my children are very young and have not had much exposure. So I think that's why I'm a little bit more hypervigilant. And I feel like when you explain that to people, that like they haven't been in the water a lot, they haven't been exposed to it a lot, we haven't done swimming lessons really because we haven't had the chance, I think they're a little bit more understanding. But I feel like, I think it's just having that agreement with the people you're around. And if those people aren't in agreement with you, then you're the one left supervising. And I'm okay with that.
Right. Better safe than sorry. Dave, what about your family and your friends, going up to the cottage or activities around water?
I think with my friends in particular, and their kids are all around the same age as mine, we're all on the same page. We haven't really spoke about water safety. We just know if the kids are down there, we're down there by the water, or the group of us are in the water with the kids to ensure that they're not too far away from us. Especially if we're swimming in Lake Superior, water's cold or shallow to a certain point, and then it drops off pretty deep. So we're pretty aware of our surroundings. Family-wise, our family's all on the same page. Family of lifeguards, and everyone is really vigilant of water and understands how dangerous open water can be. And if there's anyone who can't touch, it's always an adult in the water for sure.
Right. Well, that's great. One less discussion to have with family is great.
Yes.
There's an agreement. Yeah. Brittany, are you in the same situation? Are you pretty consistent with your friends and family?
Mostly. We do have one grandma who kind of flips to the other side and, gasps if the kids come too close to a deep puddle. So we just don't go swimming much with her, and that's fine because it keeps both of us happier in our relationship. Other than that, we do a lot of supervision because we have a lot of family members who maybe are a little bit more loose with the water safety rules with their kids. And we are totally fine with that because my husband and I both just love swimming. So we're usually in the water with them anyways.
Well, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. Your experiences, I think, will be of great interest. And thanks for sharing your stories and your approaches. And I'm really happy to hear that you are engaging in water activities because it is so important. And Liane, I'm hoping your kids get their swimming lessons soon because it is such an important part of growing up and a great skill to have as an adult. So thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Drowning prevention information and tips are available at parachute.ca/drowning. That's parachute.ca/drowning.
It's time to open your parachute.
Barbara Byers is the Public Education Director for the Life Saving Society and the Research Director for the Drowning Prevention Research Centre of Canada. Barbara is responsible for leading the collection, analysis, and dissemination of water incident research in Canada, which is used to guide the development of drowning prevention initiatives. Thanks for joining me, Barb.
Thank you, Pamela. It's nice to be here.
So, what stood out for you in the parents' discussion that we just heard about water safety and what their concerns are?
Overall, I was really impressed with all of them and how vigilant they are, how respectful they are about water, how engaged they are with their children, and how they are not deterred by potential family or friends who may be more lax and relaxed about it. So I thought they're super parents, and at obviously different ages, there's different issues, but I was really impressed. A couple things they talked about I thought are worth reinforcing. I think one of the key things is this podcast series is popping the bubble wrap. The idea, don't be super don't wrap your children in bubble mat, give them a chance, let them take risks and so on. And I agree with that. But I think around water, you've got to be really careful. I mean, just because, as you said as well, drowning can happen in seconds, like 20 seconds, and it's silent. So while you might say, okay, they can play in the backyard in the sandbox, they're 4 years old, and I can be in the kitchen and look out the window, they shouldn't play in the little wading pool in the backyard when they're 4 years old while you're in the kitchen. So I think you really have to look at the freedom you give them. And this happens with kids. At one point you're in the same room with them all the time. Then they're the next room, you can see them and so on and so forth. But you have to kind of back it up a bit when it comes to water. And the best thing you can do to really keep your kids safe is as soon as you're able to is get them in lessons and keep them in lessons. And as they get older, they become stronger swimmers and so on. So when they are at an age like, preteens, where they really do want a lot of independence, they have the skills. I think that was sort of an important message to take away, that you really do have to keep your eyes on them. And all of these parents do. So when you think of, like when Liane talked about the bathtub, that is so important. And I remember when my grown children were in babies, and you're so tempted as a parent to think, I could fold laundry, I could do something, I could do something else. But as Liane said, you've got to stay there all the time because they could slip right under the water, even when they're, 4 or 5 years old. So you have to resist that urge to do something else and use your time wisely. You got to read books to them, sing with them, play with them, do whatever it takes, but stay in that room and keep your eyes on them. So I was really glad that Liane mentioned that. And some of the other things I thought were really important. When you say your backyard pools, like say you're invited to a pool party, it's so easy to think, oh my gosh, there's like 20 adults and 4 kids, 5-to-1 ratio. But all those 20 adults are talking to each other. They're not all watching the child. So I think there is a scenario where it's so easy for that child to, slip under the water while other people are theoretically watching, but not attentively watching. So I think in those situations, you really do have to be your child's lifeguard. You have to watch them. You have to keep your eyes on them. And my sister has a backyard pool, and we went up there in the summer, and I have little grandchildren now. And I was there and I thought, oh my gosh, my little 2-year-old grandson. I was scared silly. So I bought 3 life jackets for her to keep at her pool. Said every time a toddler comes to your pool, have them wear this life jacket as an extra layer of protection. Because you may think you're watching them all the time, but someone talks to you. You're grabbing sun protection lotion or a towel. So it's so easy when you're with a group of people to be distracted. And so I thought that was a really important sort of little conversation to have and think through when you're going somewhere. If you're going to a cottage or you're going to someone's pool, is to, as a parent, sort of say, okay, I'm going to watch this one and you watch that one. And if you can't, you let me know and we'll find someone else.
It's like a designated parent or a designated supervisor or a watcher or something, right? We have the designated driver on in other areas, but a designated watcher, because a lot of times what we hear is, I thought you were watching the kids, right? So Barb, the Life Saving Society collects and reports on drownings in Canada. What did the data tell us about who is at most risk and why?
Well, drowning is the second leading cause of preventable death for children and for children under the age of 10. And, many people may be surprised to hear that. And the age group of children under 5 is the age group with the greatest risk. So when we look at the statistics, we can see that children under 1, almost all of the drownings happen when they're in bathtubs. And between 1 and 4, 1 and 5, it's often in a pool or at the beach. So that is the high risk sort of setting for that age group. And about 90% of the time, the supervision was absent or distracted. The parents might be there, but they were distracted. They were talking to someone, they were grabbing something. And the other thing, I don't have data for this, but I can certainly see it's a factor, is our phones. Most of us have a smartphone in some part of our lives, and phones and children around water are not a good combination because your head's down and you can't see them. And if you can't see them, you can't see the change in their behavior from being happy and frolicking in the water to struggling and drowning because it's silent. So that whole distraction factor, I think, is a big factor as well.
Well, and I think that silent piece is something that parents don't realize. I mean, we see the drowning scenes in movies or on TV, and we think that we will hear something happening and be able to respond, but it really is silent and it's very quick. And you talked a little bit about those layers of protection, swimming lessons being one, but what are some of your top water safety tips for parents? What should they really be focused on?
I think what's most important, I was happy to hear Dave speak about how he's out in the water watching his kids at the beach or at the cottage, even though they're older, is that you need to be the lifeguard of your kids. Of course, when they're when they're in the bathtub, when they're at a pool, but even when they're older, because it's so easy not to see the transition. And lifeguards are trained to look at the change in their behavior, and from someone swimming, parallel to the water, which is normal, to all of a sudden going vertical and bobbing up and down. And as you said, Pamela, the people don't scream and yell, "Help, I'm drowning," and wave their arms. They might be unhappy with where they're at. But if they can speak, they're not drowning because their airway is not filled with water. So you really do need to watch them, and you need to watch to see if there's any transition. So that's really important, to be their lifeguard and to be a designated lifeguard and to watch them. And with that in mind, to get off your towel, get off the chair and wade in. I used to do that with my kids, wade in up to my waist and watch them, because it's hard to see all those kids out in the lake. And it's hard to know if someone's in difficulty. And as mentioned earlier, to stay in the bathroom where the bathtub is all the time, to not be distracted, not to leave them. And I think as well, really important for non-swimmers and young children, is to put a life jacket on as an extra layer of protection. Because what a life jacket does, it ensures they're turned right side up. If they fall in, the life jacket will keep their face or their airway out of the water. Unlike water wings are toys. I mean, their arms float. Right. Which isn't really the point. You want their airway out of the water. And then to enroll them in lessons. And certainly with COVID, there haven't been lessons. It's been like the Hunger Games to get your kids in lessons. But even if you just take them to the local pool for rec swims, just make swimming a really positive, fun experience. Make it enjoyable. Make it a frequent experience. So when you can get them in the lessons, that they're ready to move forward and progress. And if it's not busy at a pool, often the lifeguards would be happy to give some tips and so on. So just to make it a really positive experience, because in a country like Canada, with more fresh water than any other country in the world, it is what we do when it's not frozen, is we do love to go in the water. So it's really important for all children to learn to swim, because it really is a life skill.
It is. And as we said, we've been talking a lot about the kids, but it's as important for the parents or the designated lifeguard to know how to swim and to know how to react if something happens.
Right. And to that point, Pam, it's never too late to learn to swim. I mean, there are lessons. Finally, they're starting now. And there's lessons for adults taught by instructors who are trained and like to teach adults. And it's different. You're not going to get a class with, 7-year-old children next to you. And
Right.
If you can learn to swim, and that means you can help your children if they get into difficulty. And also you can have fun with your kids. And I think in Canada, we all think of summer as our happy time to enjoy the nice weather and the water. So it's certainly more fun for you with your kids if you know how to swim as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the last thing would be for those of us with backyard pools, the other layer of protection would be the 4-sided pool fence. We often fence off our pools to protect the neighborhood, but that 4 side of the fence between the house and the pool won't in and of itself necessarily prevent drowning, but it certainly buys parents a little bit more time to realize where the children are, because you talked a little bit about in terms of the data, the stats that oftentimes it's in backyard pools that kids are drowning.
Exactly. And so that fourth side of the fence with the gate and the self-closing, self-latching gate really helps reduce that human error factor. Because you may say, oh, well, we always lock the sliding door in the house and maybe we have an alarm. But, it's very easy not to do that. Or you have a guest over, an older child, and they forgot and they didn't. Mm-hmm. So if you have that extra fourth fence, then you're reducing the chance for human error. And you're making it more difficult for anyone. And you can control. What you really want to do, especially with, children of all ages, but young children, is you really want to control access to the pool area. So they can't get there until you've decided that you're going to be there. You can watch them. You can open the gate. You can get them in there. And you can have fun. Right. Very, very important. And many people think, oh, well, that fence is so ugly. It's so unattractive. I've seen beautiful fences that fits very nicely into the landscaping of the yard, and it does not look awkward or odd. And I really encourage people to think out of the box and look at what the possibilities could be for the safety of your family. And you may think, oh, well, we just have teenagers or we have older kids, but people often entertain in their pool, and they'll have friends over, friends with younger kids and so on, with that pool party situation. So I think you'd never regret wanting to have that extra safety for your family and friends.
Yeah, those layers of protection are so important because it buys parents time. And if I know parents, buying them time is something that is really valuable for them.
Absolutely.
So,
And I
thanks
think
so much.
one more thing, Pam, I think it's really important if you have a cottage or if you have a pool and you have guests over, is you set the rules, this is what we do. So toddlers wear life jackets. The cottage, kids wear life jackets when they're in deeper water. Everyone wears a life jacket in a boat. Parents have to watch. Just lay, these are the rules. These are the guidelines. This is what we do. And I think other guests are probably grateful because it takes the pressure off them. And in many cases, they may not have thought of it themselves.
Absolutely, especially if they don't have a cottage themselves, right? So thanks so much for joining me. It's been really interesting and informative. I know parents are really looking for this kind of information. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Pamela.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. Popping the Bubble Wrap is a podcast of Parachute, Canada's national injury prevention charity, whose mission is for Canadians to live long lives to the fullest by preventing serious and fatal injuries. We release episodes every 2 weeks. On the next episode, we'll be talking about play spaces. Help us reach parents and caregivers by sharing this link with your friends and family and giving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Popping the Bubble Wrap is produced for Parachute by Story Studio Network and Eye Contact Productions.
This is Story Studio Network.